I'm excited to talk with you about how you can help busy families talk about faith. I'm a parent of teenagers myself, and I saw this cartoon not too long ago, and I think it captures how many parents feel. It says this: if you ever want to call a family meeting, just turn off the Wi-Fi router and wait in the room where it's located. That would actually work with my teenagers. That would get them out of their rooms and to a family discussion. Now, in the midst of busy families wanting to connect and wanting to talk more about faith, I think one of the reasons that parents have such a hard time going deeper in conversations with their kids is they're busy, number one, but they're also intimidated by talking about faith. They're afraid that their teenagers are going to ask them a tough question about faith that they're not going to be able to answer. And that could actually happen. That's probably happened to you. I know that's happened to me in youth ministry. The reality is the teenagers that we love and serve have all sorts of tough questions about God and faith. In the research that we've done at the Fuller Youth Institute, 70% of youth group graduates admit to having doubts or tough questions about their faith. And those are just the ones that admit to having those tough questions. It's probably even more than 70% are walking around with big questions about God, and they often don't feel safe talking about those at home or at church. I want to tell you about a junior high boy named Steve. Now, I love middle schoolers. Our youngest is in middle school, and I just love the inquisitiveness of middle schoolers. And this middle school boy, he came to his senior pastor with all sorts of questions regularly. There was one day he came to his senior pastor with this question. He said, "Pastor, if I raise my pinky finger, will God know which finger I'm going to raise before I raise it?" And the pastor said to this boy named Steve, "Yes, Steve, if you raise your pinky finger, God knows which finger you're going to raise before you raise it." Well, Steve was really bothered by starving children in Africa, so he then pulled out from behind his back a copy of a Life magazine that had pictures of starving children in Africa. And he said to his pastor, "Well, Pastor, does God know what's happening with these starving children in Africa?" And the well-intentioned pastor said, "Yes, Steve, God knows what's happening with those starving children in Africa, and we just need to trust God." Now again, this pastor was well-intentioned, but for Steve, that wasn't an on-ramp to a deeper discussion about faith. That was a conversational dead end. Steve walked out of that Christian church that day and never again went back to a Christian church for worship. And apparently he never felt comfortable talking with his parents about his tough questions about God either. Now, I've said this junior high boy was named Steve, and I'm guessing that all of us actually know who this junior high boy was. It's Steve Jobs. In the biography by Isaacson, this story is told. And I read this story as I was converting from PC to Mac. Mac is a lot better, I will say this. And as amazing of an impact as Steve Jobs has had through technology, just imagine if that same entrepreneurial energy and inquisitiveness and vision had also been channeled into kingdom purposes. If we could have helped Steve's pastor and Steve's parents have better conversations with Steve about faith, I think our world would be different. And here's what we have found in our research when it comes to helping young people talk about faith. We've already said that 70% of young people have tough questions about God. Now, here's the encouraging news, is a lot of times we hear that, we're volunteers in our churches, and we hear that stat, oh my goodness, so many young people have these tough questions, and we get freaked out about that. We shouldn't be freaked out. Because when young people had the chance to express and explore those tough questions, those doubts, that was actually correlated with greater faith maturity in both high school and college. Let me put it more simply. It's not doubt that is toxic to faith, it's silence. This is the message that we need to know in our churches. This is the message that we need to help families understand too. It's not doubt that is toxic to faith, it's silence. So whether we have an inquisitive middle schooler like Steve in our families, or whether we have a 17-year-old getting ready to head out of the home into college, military, or the workforce, we can help parents if we use these 4 ideas that I'm going to give you to help busy families talk about faith. So 4 different ideas that you can pass on to parents so that they can have better conversations about faith. And by the way, you can also use these in your youth ministry and your small group also. Here's the first idea. Now, if I had been Steve Jobs, senior pastor, here's what I wish I had said to Steve. And I have used this phrase time and time again with my own teenagers as well as teenagers in our youth ministry. It's a 4-word phrase. I don't know, but. I don't know, but. See, I wish that pastor had said back to Steve, Steve, that's such a good question. I don't know, but I know this woman in our church who loves tough questions like that. How about if you, me, and your mom and her, let's get together for coffee and talk about it. Or I don't know, but here's what I have found to be true about God. Or as I have said to my own teenagers as a parent, as our family has seen and navigated tough things ourselves, I have said to my own kids, I'm not sure why God would be allowing this. But here's what I know from Romans, that suffering leads to perseverance, perseverance, character, and character, hope. That 4-word phrase, I don't know, but, I encourage you to keep that in your pocket as a volunteer and offer it to parents who are afraid that their child is going to ask them a tough question. This buys them some time and helps them continue the conversation at a later date. Here's the second idea. We saw this so many times in our research, is that parents who are really good at talking about faith are also really good at asking for forgiveness from their teenagers. I remember we were interviewing parents who have built amazing relationships with their kids, and their kids have long-term, or what we call sticky faith. And it was my turn to call this dad and do an hour-long interview with him. And he had 3 daughters who were in high school and college. And when it was time to call, he picked up the phone, and I said, are you ready to do the interview now? And he said, I just don't feel like I can do this interview. I've had to apologize to all 3 of my daughters in the last 48 hours. And by then we had done enough interviewing and coding that I was seeing this theme, and I said, sir, that's exactly why we want to talk to you. Because we see that parents who have the best conversations with their kids about faith and all sorts of topics are quick to say, I'm sorry. As a parent myself, I'm probably apologizing to my kids at least once a week. Generally, it's my tone of voice that's a problem. If you were to look at a transcript of what I say, it's okay. But it's the tone of voice that betrays my frustration and my impatience. Part of what we can do as volunteers is help busy families by inviting parents to apologize before their kids. Here's a third idea. If we want to help families have better conversations about faith, we can give parents discussion questions. Give parents tangible questions that they can use either before or after a Wednesday night meeting, a small group meeting, our weekend worship services. I love what our church does is they often give us questions to talk about with our kids before church and even before Sunday morning. I love the message that sends, that the conversation starts at home and then the church reinforces it versus the conversation starts at church and the home reinforces it. So often on Sunday mornings, I make cinnamon rolls, unless you be under any illusions. When I make cinnamon rolls, it usually involves a hand motion like this, okay? So I pop open that can and put the cinnamon rolls on the cookie sheet, and 14 minutes later, we have homemade cinnamon rolls because I made them in my home. And while the cinnamon rolls are cooking or while our family's driving to church, we talk about those questions. I love it when our church gives me, as a parent, discussion questions, just 1, 2, or 3. And then the fourth idea, the last idea that we're going to look at today, is help parents share their spiritual journey. One youth pastor asked 20 of his high school students, do you know how your kids became Christians? 0 of those 20 students knew how their parents had become Christians. That grieved that youth pastor, so he offered training for the youth ministry parents on how to share their testimony. Parents flocked to that. So often parents need our encouragement and sometimes even our training on how to share their spiritual journey. I tell our youth ministry team at our church all the time that I need help as a parent to process the deep issues that my kids are navigating and their deep questions about faith. Hopefully, these 4 ideas are tools you can use to equip parents with what they need to move forward at home. Thanks.